Hey guys, what's going on? It's me, Jay. I know I'm going back on something that I said I wasn't gonna do, but I'm gonna do it, whatever. And we're gonna do the year in review 1989. Now for the WWF. Now in 1989, I wasn't even 5 years old yet. You know what I mean? I was very young. I was like 4 years old. So obviously, I wasn't watching professional wrestling at this time, but retrospectively, I went back. I talked about I used to go to video stores and rent wrestling tapes. So I rented everything from 1989, particularly SummerSlam and WrestleMania of that year, and I loved it. And then later on, I got to watch, the Flair and Steamboat triple match, the three matches that they had at Wrestle War Clash of Champions, uh, Wrestle War and Clash of Champions, respectively. You know, those classic matches that fans consider the greatest matches in the history of professional wrestling. So it was a really great year to be a professional wrestling fan. So taking us back to 1989, what is on the charts? Paul Abdul is on the charts. Public Enemy is about to fight the power. Spike Lee is about to come out with his first number one hit ever in history. He would do the right thing in that movie. And Milli Vanilli is about to fake it, and lip sync the song "Girl, You Know It's True." "Look Away" by Chicago is another number one hit starting the beginning of the year, and of course George H.W. Bush is the president of the United States at this point in time. So we're 1989, and who is the WWE champion? Of course, the Macho Man Randy Savage, who won the title the previous year at WrestleMania IV. Yeah, the Macho Man is the champion. And initially, he and Hulk Hogan, of course, they've had their year. 1988 was their year. I always like to do these. When I do these, I always like to go back to the year before and, make sure that I, give a little background on the storyline. So here it is. In 1988, they had something, Saturday Night's Main Event, a historic Saturday Night's Main Event in which Andre the Giant defeated Hulk Hogan. Now, what does it mean he defeated Hulk Hogan? He didn't actually defeat Hulk Hogan. Um, he Earl Hebner, who was the official referee. Well, Dave Hebner was the official referee, and Earl switched with him, and Earl made the count instead of Dave. So Andre the Giant basically cheated to get this win. And this Saturday Night's Main Event was a very historic Saturday Night's Main Event because still to this day, even years and years later, it holds the record as being the top-selling wrestling show of all time. Even the ones in the Attitude Era in the 90s didn't even top it. It was like 80 million viewers or whatever. But Andre wins the title from Hulk Hogan, ending Hulk Hogan's 4-year run. Hogan had been the champion since he arrived in the company in 1984, beating the Iron Sheik, of course, avenging Bob Backlund's loss to him in the same arena, Madison Square Garden. Backlund had lost it in '83. So he now has been the champion for 4 years. He had his historic match with Andre the Giant at WrestleMania III, 93,000 plus fans, the Pontiac Silverdome, setting the attendance record there, the indoor attendance record. Of course, he body slammed Andre the Giant and he retained the title, but Andre won in a rematch, so that's what Andre got. And he got it in 1988. They built the event, the first Royal Rumble, around that contract signing. But what does Andre do? Andre sells the WWF Championship to the newly arrived Ted DiBiase. Ted DiBiase comes from Mid-South Wrestling. He had been one of the biggest heels in Mid-South Wrestling from 1982 when he turned on his best friend, his best man at his wedding, the Junkyard Dog. And Ernie Ladd was looking for a heel at that time because JYD had basically beaten everybody. So he said, Ted DiBiase said, well, I know a heel. You're looking at him. And Ernie Ladd was like, man, why didn't I think of that? So all's well and good. And he becomes a big star in Mid-South Wrestling, leads the Rat Pack with Matt Bourne and Jim Duggan. But eventually, Mid-South Wrestling goes the way of the dodo. Jim Crockett buys it out, in 1987. And what was then called, what later became to be, was then Mid-South Wrestling, later comes to be called the UWF. And by 1988, it's no more, and Ted DiBiase is on to greener pastures, and he's come to the WWF with a new gimmick, the $1 Million Man gimmick. Now, this gimmick was unprecedented because Vince McMahon went all out for this gimmick. He had limousines, he had hotel stays, private flights, everything for Ted DiBiase. He basically rolled out the red carpet for Ted DiBiase. And some of the skits that DiBiase would do where he would offer people money to bark like a dog, offer people money to dribble a basketball, and then knock the basketball out of their hands. Just cruel stuff that made the $1 Million Man the ultimate villain. But this thing was making him an even worse villain because he was now looking to buy the WWF Championship, something that we as fans knew that you had to earn. But Andre the Giant and Bobby Heenan were up for it, and Andre wins the title and sells it to Ted DiBiase, and Jack Tunney, who's the president of the WWF, steps in and is like, wait a minute, no, you can't do that, Andre. The title is declared vacant. So at WrestleMania IV, the title is held up in a tournament. The first tournament ever aired on pay. Well, not really the first tournament ever aired on pay-per-view because that was Wrestling Classic in '85. But, at a WrestleMania, at a big event for the WWF Championship. In reality, the WWF Championship had never been held up in a tournament. I know there's the fake kayfabe tournament that crowned the first WWF champion in 1963 with Buddy Rogers, but that wasn't real. You know what I mean? Like, there was no tournament in Rio de Janeiro. Buddy Rogers had been the NWA champion, and the Capital Wrestling Corporation, which was what the New York territory was at that time called, decided to secede from the NWA and put the belt back on Buddy Rogers because Lou Thez, who they had decided to go with, was not a big seller in the Northeastern Territory where Vince McMahon Sr. and Toots operated. But so it was a fictionalized tournament. So was the Intercontinental Tournament that crowned Pat Patterson in 1979. That was also a fictionalized tournament. Neither tournament existed, but this was and they always had the King of the Ring tournaments since the mid-'80s. But, we never saw them on TV until 1993, as I discussed in my year in review in 1993 video. So, WrestleMania IV will be the first time ever that we'll see the title put up for grabs, in a tournament style. And the odds-on favorite is the Macho Man, because Macho Man, a couple of weeks before that, had turned babyface, right? It was a Saturday night's main event. He was actually supposed to win the Intercontinental Championship back from the Honky Tonk Man. He lost it at WrestleMania III in the classic match against Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, who's now the Intercontinental Champion, going out of WrestleMania III in '87, he requests time off to spend with his son because his wife is pregnant, right, and has a baby, his son Richie. Vince McMahon's not having it. Steamboat's like, wait a minute, you're going to interfere with my family? Hell no. So Vince is like, okay, I'm having you drop it to the Honky Tonk Man. And of course, he's insulted Ricky Steamboat. Here he is, one of the greatest workers of all time, as he proves in this year, the year that's the focus of this video, in 1989. He proves he's one of the best. In the matches he has with Ric Flair when he goes back to the NWA. But at the same time, they're having him lose to an Elvis impersonator. So he drops the belt to the Honky Tonk Man, and Vince wants the Honky Tonk Man to then drop it to Randy Savage. Honky says, I'm not doing it. I'm not dropping the belt to Randy Savage. I'm just not. So him not dropping the belt to Randy Savage then puts the plans for WrestleMania IV into a tailspin, because the plan for WrestleMania IV was to have the tournament and have DiBiase win the tournament and become the legal WWF champion. And as he's becoming the legal WWF champion, then at WrestleMania V, Hogan will defeat him for the title and win the title for a second time. That doesn't happen. Now, the plan that they have is the Honky Tonk Man and the Hart Foundation come out and attack Macho Man. And as they're attacking Macho Man, Honky Tonk Man is lifting up the guitar, about to hit Macho Man over the head with it. And Miss Elizabeth goes to the back and gets Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan comes out and he saves the day for Macho Man. Him and Macho Man shake, and boom, they form the Mega Powers. The Madness and the Mania together for once. They've been in the same company for about 3 years, and they hadn't really had any interaction necessarily with one another, save for a few Madison Square Garden shows that they did against each other in '85. But this proves to be a dynamic duo. And for the rest of the year in 1988, in various forms, including the first SummerSlam, they take on Andre the Giant and Ted DiBiase. The first SummerSlam is Hulk Hogan and the Macho Man Mega Powers versus Mega Bucks, Andre the Giant and Ted DiBiase. So everything's well and good, right? Savage is the champion. Savage wins the tournament at WrestleMania IV against Ted DiBiase in the finals. And everything is all well and good, in the land of Macho Man and Hulk Hogan. Not really, though. Because at that same SummerSlam, how do they win? One of the ways they win is Miss Elizabeth showing up in a skimpy skirt to distract the referee. And, basically showing off her ass to distract the referee. And who's the referee? Just the guy, one of the guys who's newly returned to the WWE right now, Jesse the Body Ventura, right? He's the referee for this match, right? And it's crazy that we're talking about the first SummerSlam because we just finished the 37th SummerSlam. So, with this distraction, with this aversion, if you will, the Mega Powers win. But during this, Hulk Hogan ever so slightly kind of puts his hand on Miss Elizabeth's backside, and Macho Man looks over at him. And then Jesse, later on, as he's doing this, as things were going on, little things with little innuendos, Jesse is stirring the pot. Jesse is saying, "Look at it, Monsoon. Look what Hulkster did," calling him the luster, right? The luster. That he's lusting after Miss Elizabeth. And Macho Man is seeing it too. And another dynamic that's really happening is that as Macho Man is champion, still the focus is on Hulk Hogan, right? The focus is all on Hulk Hogan, The only time you see the Macho Man in main events is when he's teaming with Hulk Hogan. The focus of the entire year in 1988 is Hulk Hogan and the Macho Man. So it comes to a head at the Royal Rumble 1989. Now this is the second Royal Rumble, and once again, like I said, the early Royal Rumbles, nothing was really at stake, only prestige. So during this, Randy Savage, because he's in the Royal Rumble, because at this time, like I said, the title shot wasn't at stake yet. So the champion, the WWF champion, could be in the Royal Rumble. So Randy Savage is in the Royal Rumble. He's eliminated by Hulk Hogan. And then he comes back and he starts yelling at Hogan, right? And Hogan and him have kind of a face-off. So you're like, oh my God, what's going to happen next? Right? And this is in January. So at a Saturday night's main event, they're facing Big Boss Man and Akeem, which is Slick's new team. Big Bubba Rogers, who was the former bodyguard of Jim Cornette when Jim Cornette and the Midnight Express in 86. Remember, 86, 87, he took on Dusty Rhodes. He started off as a jobber on Jim Crockett Promotions TV. Dusty Rhodes was impressed with him, and then he signed him to be the bodyguard of James E. Cornette as Big Bubba Rogers. But he decides he's going to take the big money and work the program with Hogan in the WWF, and they make him a police officer, because he was a prison guard in his real life, so that makes sense. One Man Gang, who came into the company in 1988 as One Man Gang, is now in 1989. He becomes this in late 88, right? Timely, because there's a movie out called Coming to America in 1989, starring Eddie Murphy and Arsenio Hall, right, about two African immigrants from the fictional country of Zamunda who come to Queens, New York, looking for a wife. And the character, and this is produced by Barry Blaustein, a guy who would go on later in 1999 to produce the movie Beyond the Mat. When we talk about 1999, we'll talk about Beyond the Mat and impact that Beyond the Mat had, specifically for the Royal Rumble that year in the match with The Rock and Mankind. But anyway, in 1989, he produces the movie Coming to America. And the titular character, the main character, Eddie Murphy's character, his name is Akeem. So the whole idea was to use that name and spoof Dusty Rhodes. Because Dusty Rhodes, ever since he was in Florida Championship Wrestling in the mid-'70s and he turned babyface in 1975, he was kind of, especially when he was in New York, like in 76, 77, he was portrayed as a black guy, as a white guy trying to act black, blue-eyed soul, if you will. He even said it in a lot of his interviews, because his promo style was heavily copied from Muhammad Ali anyway. So it was to spoof him. And at this time, he was still the booker for Jim Crockett Promotions / what will become in 1988 WCW. But in 1989, here's the funny part: Dusty Rhodes comes to the WWF. He gets fired from Jim Crockett Promotions in around like December, because they do an angle where they want to turn the Road Warriors heel. And in order to turn the Road Warriors heel, the Road Warriors are awesomely over, right? They've been over since like 1982 when they first, 81, 82 when they first came into Georgia. When they were discovered by Ole Anderson at Grandma B's in Minnesota. A lot of Minnesota talk today with Tim Waltz being the VP nominee. But anyway, they were discovered by Ole Anderson in Minnesota at Grandma B's, and they don't immediately go into the AWA. They first come into Georgia, right in the middle on national TV, and they beat up the Briscoes, Jack and Jerry. And they're already megally over. They formed the Legion of Doom faction with Jake Roberts and King Kong Bundy. But from there, they're kind of green, so they do eventually leave Georgia in the mid-'80s and go to Vern Gagne's territory, their home territory in Minnesota, and it kind of saves the promotion for a while, because Hogan leaves in '82. They come in almost right after from Georgia, and they're instantly over, right? The first Super Clash, they have a match with the Freebirds, where the Freebirds come out in Confederate face paint, and they come out in their Road Warriors face paint, they're over. But by like 1986-ish, 85, 80, like 1980, 1986-ish, they decide it's not lucrative enough here in the AWA. AWA is a dying territory, which it was, right? It was a couple of years away from closing its doors, which it finally did in 1991. So they leave and they come back to TBS Wrestling, which is now owned by Jim Crockett, and they become big and huge. And Crockett had the first War Games in '87, the feud with the Four Horsemen, the feud with the Midnight Express, Night of Skywalkers, that year Starrcade, and everybody loves them. You know, the matches they have with the Four Horsemen and the Midnight Express, they're over bay faces. There's no way they could ever turn heel, but they want to turn them heel because Sting, and Starrcade '88, Sting, who is a new star, in response to WrestleMania IV, Jim Crockett Promotion decides to air a cable special with Sting challenging for the NWA Championship or the WCW Championship, whatever way you want to cut it, because at this time it was the same thing. They decide to air this match on free TV between Sting and Ric Flair. They go to a draw, and Sting and Ric Flair, Ric Flair makes Sting. Sting becomes an instant star. So Dusty Rhodes, who was the most over babyface prior to that in Jim Crockett Promotions, decides he wants to team with Sting against a heel Road Warrior. But how do you turn the Road Warrior at Starrcade in 1988? How do you turn the Road Warriors heel? So the idea they come up with is using the Road Warriors with spikes from one of their shoulder pads and stab Dusty in the eye. But TBS was just purchased the company from Jim Crockett. It says no, they have a no blood policy. They don't want any blood on TV, right? But Dusty doesn't care. He violates this anyway, and they have an episode of WCW Saturday Night where he has a bloody eye, right? Blood all over, blood just gushing out of his eye. And WCW says, you know, that's it. He's been having problems with Ric Flair because the Horsemen, you know, despite being over as they are and heels, they never win matches, right? So he and Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes are having problems backstage. So Ric Flair says it's either me or him. And there was talk about Ric Flair leaving the company because he didn't like the direction they were going in as far as booking anyway, because they brought in Jim Herd. We talked about Jim Herd in the 1992 video. So there was talk at SummerSlam '88 bringing him in, right? Him and Ted DiBiase teaming, at SummerSlam 1988 against the Mega Powers, which would have been cool, but that doesn't happen. Instead, Dusty goes, and they put Dusty in polka dots. So now you have the character Akeem that was used to spoof Dusty in the same promotion with Dusty, and Dusty's back in the World Wrestling Federation for the first time in 12 years. I'm not 12 years, 8 years basically, since like 77. He's finally back in New York, but he's not the star he was in 77. He's not the star he was in 78 when he wrestled against superstar Billy Graham. He's way different. He's older now. So Vince McMahon, the new Vince McMahon Jr., Vincent Kennedy McMahon, thinks the best way to get him over is to put him in polka dots. And at SummerSlam 1989, they have him in a sing-off against the Honky Tonk. It's really weird stuff. Anyway, Dusty is here in the WWF, baby, and that's when I first got introduced to him, because I didn't know about him in the NWA, because when I used to go to Blockbuster and rent these videos, NWA didn't put out a lot of material. A lot of the stuff from NWA was a lot of Clash of Champions stuff. You couldn't really see it. You had to watch it. They didn't put it out on tape. They didn't have the video library that the WWF had. So I never saw that stuff. And I never saw the Florida stuff from the mid-'70s with him and Kevin Sullivan or Pax Long Man or any of that classic stuff, or the stuff prior to that when he was in the AWA and him and Dick Murdoch were the West Texas Outlaws. Never saw any of that with Dusty. Only his WWF run. Because even when he came back to WCW, he didn't really wrestle a whole of a lot. Like, he wrestled a few times with him and Dusty teaming together in '94, And that was about it, And then we talked about in '98 when he turned heel and sold out against Larry Zbyszko. But I didn't really see Dusty a lot. But this would be Dusty's year, the year he would switch over from WCW to the WWF. And the way they wanted to spoof him was put him with this manager, Sapphire, a common man and a common woman, and have him in a sing-off against the Honky Tonk. It's really weird. But with Akeem, going back to the original premise, Akeem is this character that his theme song is a Jive Soul Bro. He's managed by Slick, a Jive Soul Bro, a Jive Soul Bro, a big fat white guy, George Gray. Respects him when he was the one-man gang. It was kind of corny too. But he was a little, the 747, the one-man gang, was a little bit more intimidating than Akeem. So he's the Twin Towers now, with Akeem and the Big Boss Man. They're going against the Mega Powers. Now, Miss Elizabeth gets knocked off the apron, and she gets hurt. So Hulk Hogan, rather than help Macho Man with Boss Man and Akeem, attends to Miss Elizabeth in the back. And then Savage wins anyway. But then he's like, wait a minute, Hogan left me out here, and he's messing around with my girl, in the back. So he goes to the back, and he actually beats up Hogan, and that's the end of the Mega Powers. For a year they've been together, but now they've just exploded. So, and then Savage cuts that promo, lust in your eyes, Hulkster, for Elizabeth, huh? You were grandstanding and hot talking, eh? You were grandstanding and hot talking, huh? Lust in your eyes for Elizabeth. Ooh, yeah. Can't do as good as a Macho Man as I used to be able to do. I love the Macho Man when I was a kid. But anyway, he was a heel. But this was the kind of storyline, though, where you could sympathize with either one. You could say, well, Hogan was just trying to be a good friend. He was only trying to help, Miss Elizabeth. You know what I mean? Like, she was hurt. What do you want him to do? Like, he's trying to do the honorable thing, but at the same time, in Macho Man's eyes, he was hurting her. He was abandoning the team, and he was only after her. So in Macho Man's eyes, it was like, you're only doing that. You're only teaming with me to get close to my girl. You're not really. You're not really teaming with me, to be close to me. You're only teaming with me to get close to my woman. It makes sense in both guys' eyes. So now we're headed to WrestleMania. Now they've exploded. Now we're headed to a collision course, basically. Trump Plaza, Hotel and Casino, Donald Trump and Hulk Hogan. Their friendship goes all the way back to WrestleMania IV, because I forgot to mention in the tournament, where is it hosted? Atlantic City, New Jersey. Trump Plaza Hotel and Casino. It was a plan to have WrestleMania there every year, because Vince McMahon and Donald Trump are friends, and Hulk Hogan and Donald Trump become friends this year. He references him in promos and everything. Trump is married to Marla Maples at this time. And it's a huge buildup to this huge event. The Mega Powers exploding. The Macho Man putting up his WWF Championship against Hulk Hogan. Other matches I want to talk about as far as WrestleMania V. Rick Rude and the Ultimate Warrior. Now, who is the Ultimate Warrior? The Ultimate Warrior is Jim Hellwig. We talked about him on the Sting video. He was the former partner of Jim Hellwig, both in Memphis. He was Jim Justice Hellwig in Memphis. And then later, he and Sting became the Power Team USA, and then the Blade Runners, and then Power Team USA when they went to Bill Watts. Now, Hellwig didn't. He was trained by Rick Bassman in Southern California. Hellwig didn't get along with Bill Watts. He despised Bill Watts. He thought he was a bully. So Hellwig hightails it out of there to World Class Championship Wrestling, where he's then managed by Gary Hart, just the same guy that One Man Gang was managed by when he was there. And Gary Hart, being creative, comes up with the name the Dingo Warrior. Now, what's the Dingo? Who knows? You know what I mean? But it was kind of political because at that time, remember, this is Dallas, the Dallas territory. This is World Class Championship Wrestling. We talked about it. We have a video on the Von Erichs on this channel. Who's the main star of World Class Championship Wrestling? Kerry Von Erich, who kind of looks like Jim Hellwig, and he's called the modern day warrior. So he had to, I guess, on thin ice. He's the Dingo Warrior, and the dingo is an animal native to Australia, but he's a native of Queens, New York. Anyway, it doesn't make any sense. But that's what it is. And he's there from 1987 and for 86, 87, and then he comes into the WWF. And immediately Vince McMahon loves him. He falls in love with the look of intensity. He sees stars in his eyes as the future of his company. Because, Hulk Hogan is getting old, and even in 86, he was starting to look to other options outside of Hulk Hogan. And he wants to, and here's another thing we're going to talk about as far as 1989 is concerned. Vince McMahon wants to transition Hulk Hogan into movies. He's starting to do movies himself. You know what I mean? And he has this idea for this movie, No Holds Barred, that comes out in June of 1989, which plays into the storyline. But anyway, we're still with Ultimate Warrior in 88. So Ultimate Warrior goes on a tear. Finally, this is always happening. Funny stuff is always happening to Honky Tonk Man. Impromptu shit. Honky Tonk Man's opponent for SummerSlam that year, first SummerSlam, Madison Square Garden, 1988, is supposed to be Brutus the Barber Beefcake. And Beefcake doesn't make it. He has personal issues. So they say, they need somebody to fill in for Beefcake. Well, they got the Ultimate Warrior. And in mere seconds, he bulldozes over Honky Tonk Man, who's had an impressive reign so far. They don't call him the greatest Intercontinental Champion in history for nothing, right? He could rival Gunther. Gunther could rival him nowadays. But anyway, back then he was. So Ultimate Warrior bulldozes over him. He wins the Intercontinental Championship. And he's going to WrestleMania V as the Intercontinental Champion. And he's taking on Rick Rude. Now, Rick Rude is a guy who he's another guy, another world-class alum. In 1986, he was the first world-class champion. In 1986, world class, even though Fritz had always tried to be loyal to the NWA, even though they never wanted to put the belt on any of his boys. We talked about it. They put it on Kerry in 1984, beating Ric Flair out of sympathy because David died, right? And they never wanted to put it on Fritz either, right? Even though Fritz was the president in the 1970s of the NWA, but they still never wanted to put it on. Like, his family was like persona non grata, even though the Dallas territory was one of the most successful territories in pro wrestling ever. So finally, they leave the NWA. Now Vince has left, Georgia has left, Jim Crockett Promotions. Well, Georgia's back in it because it got sold to Jim Crockett, and Jim Crockett's the president. And towards the late 80s, he's monopolizing the champion. He's not allowing the champion, who is Ric Flair, for most of the 80s to go touring around other territories. He's just keeping him in Charlotte, or in Dallas, because Jim Crockett, had relocated to Dallas after he bought the UWF in 1987. So, but he's keeping him within that wrestling territory. So Fritz says, "Fuck that," even before he moved to Dallas. Even before Crockett moved to Dallas in '86, Fritz says, "Fuck that. We're leaving the NWA. We're making our own champion." And their first champion was Rick Rude. But it doesn't really work out in World Class. He leaves later to go to the NWA himself, to Jim Crockett, and teams him Raging Bull Manny Fernandez in a tag team for a while. But then he makes the jump to the WWF in '88. And he's put with Bobby Heenan, something he really didn't like because he felt he really didn't need a manager, even though he had a manager in Percy Pringle in World Class when he was the champion. But I don't know why he felt he didn't need a manager, but anyway, he didn't like Heenan. But he and Heenan are a pair, and they have big plans for him. They have a plan for him that he will go on to WrestleMania V, and he does, to defeat the Ultimate Warrior. Bobby Heenan pulls out the Ultimate Warrior's leg. He holds down the Warrior's leg, and Rick Rude gets the pin for the 1-2-3. So going out of WrestleMania V, Rick Rude is no longer. I mean, Ultimate Warrior is no longer the Intercontinental Champion. What's happening with Andre the Giant? Well, Andre the Giant now is severely pushed down the card. He's no longer in the main events like he was in '88. He now has to rekindle his feud that he had at WrestleMania I with Big John Studd. Big John Studd came back around the time of the Royal Rumble, and he wins the Royal Rumble. He becomes the second Royal Rumble winner in history. And they're not going to put him against Andre because I guess they feel like he's old, and maybe even though it was only a couple of years ago, it was only like 5 years ago, fans wouldn't really remember when he took on Andre the Giant at WrestleMania I, the feud he had with Andre the Giant, even though he and Bobby Heenan were the ones who shaved Andre's hair. But now Heenan is in Andre's corner. So they have Jake the Snake Roberts taking on Andre the Giant with Big John Studd as the referee. And this match is severely boring, but the story of this match is that Andre the Giant is scared of snakes. Here's Andre the Giant. They even lied in WWE, said that he never lost the championship, he never lost a match in 15 years, and that he'd never been body slammed, despite the fact that he'd been body slammed by Harley Race and Mass Superstar Bill Eadie, and even body slammed by Antonio Inoki when he in his retirement tour in Japan. But anyway, they said he'd never been body slammed and he never lost. And in the WWF, I guess he never did lose, in that territory known to that audience. But here he is, scared of snakes. So every time Jake would bring the snake out, Jake is now a babyface, would bring the snake out, Andre would run scared, which he does, at WrestleMania V. So Jake gets disqualified. Anyway, we're bringing the snake out. Andre gets disqualified because he beats up Big John Studd, the referee. But as far as the Mega Powers exploding, the whole storyline behind this is who will Elizabeth side with? Will she side with Hulk Hogan, or will she side with Will she side with Hulk Hogan, or will she side with the Macho Man? Well, she eventually doesn't side with either one, and Hulk Hogan wins the championship. So he's the champion for the second time. Now, in the months that follow, Macho Man not only wins the King of the Ring. He defeats Hacksaw Jim Duggan for the King of the Ring title. Hacksaw Jim Duggan beat Haku, and he beat Hacksaw Jim Duggan for the King of the Ring title. So he becomes the Macho King Randy Savage. And The WWF Women's Championship that Sherry and Rockin' Robin, Jake Roberts' sister, was feuding for is now no more. So they retire Sherry as a wrestler and they bring her in as a manager. And she's sensational Queen Sherry with the Macho King. And Macho Man is now a heel, a full-fledged heel. And he was already a heel when he turned on Hogan, but him and Hogan have a couple of rematches here and there around the band, and Elizabeth eventually does appear in the corner of Hulk Hogan. But what is coming up for SummerSlam that year? Well, Hulk Hogan, starts to have a feud with the Big Boss Man in a lot of steel cages because, again, that's what they brought the Boss Man there for, was to feud with Hulk Hogan. And Hulk Hogan has done this movie, No Holds Barred, starring Tommy Tiny Lister. Many people would know Tommy Lister, from the movie Friday as Debo, or from, it was Bullet or Gridlock. It was some Tupac movie. It was one of Tupac's movies. Let me look that up. Oh, no, matter of fact, it was the last last movie that Pac ever made before he passed away, gang related with Jim Belushi. So anyway, Tommy Tiny Lister, a man from Compton, California. Um, you know, blind in one eye, big motherfucker. But anyway, they need a villain for this Hulk Hogan movie. The movie is basically Hulk Hogan as this wrestler named Rip. They portray wrestling as real. Stan Hansen is in it. Hulk Hogan and Vince McMahon write it one night on a coke bench, and they planned this to be the launching pad for Hulk Hogan's movie career. He was in Rocky 3 in '82, but he hasn't been in a movie in like 7 years. So they basically make it a wrestling version of Rocky without the heartfelt story like the '80s Rockies, not the '76 Rocky. So, all corny and shit. And it's a horrible movie, but Vince McMahon's plan is to bring the star of the movie, Zeus, played by Tommy Tiny Lister, into reality and have him face Hulk Hogan in a match. And when they air the movie on pay-per-view, it'll be the match and the movie. So Hogan's having a match on Saturday night's main event with the Big Boss Man, and out comes Zeus. Big Debo motherfucker, like the literal Debo motherfucker, like Debo actually, Debo before he was Debo. Coming out, and Jesse Ventura is like, "This ain't no movie, Monsoon. This is real life." And here, the real Zeus is faced with not the wrestler Rip, but the wrestler Hulk Hogan. So now, but they got to train this guy to be a wrestler. So it's a couple of months, and at SummerSlam 1989, finally, Zeus, a movie character, will step into the ring, teaming with the Macho Man because they had to be a team. You know what I mean? Because he couldn't carry the ball on his own. He doesn't know how to wrestle. So it had to be a team. Hulk Hogan, once again, another tag team main event. Hulk Hogan and Brutus the Barber Beefcake taking on Zeus and the Macho Man. And the promos that Sherry and Zeus and the Macho Man cut are some of the most classic promos that you ever want to see. Just crazy, crazy shit. There's one with them climbing a cage. There's one with on the Brother Love show where he's breathing and breathing and breathing, and he's like Zeus, and he's not saying nothing, just standing there breathing. And they come up with a nickname for Sherry, Scary Sherry. And Zeus is like, Brutus Beefcake Barber, Brutus Beefcake Barber. It's crazy. It's a crazy ass promo. Anyway, they have the match, SummerSlam '89. It's a pretty decent match for what it was. But they decide to bring Zeus back for Survivor Series and then a one-on-one match against Hogan. On the same time, they air Noah's Bar. Noah's Bar turns out to be a huge flop. It wasn't what Vince McMahon expected, but it was much better for Tiny Lister. I mean, he had done a cameo before that on Perfect Strangers, but he hadn't really done anything else. And then, of course, that would launch him into the Friday role, which would become his most iconic role with Ice Cube. So again, they bring him back for Survivor Series. He's on Ted DiBiase's team against Hulk Hogan's team. Hulk Hogan's team eventually wins. Now there's talk about bringing him back in 1990 to actually defeat Hulk Hogan for the championship, but that doesn't happen. Eventually they go with the Ultimate Warrior, who does regain the Intercontinental Championship from Rick Rude at SummerSlam. And, what's Macho Man doing going into SummerSlam? I mean, going into 1990, he's still the Macho King. And eventually, he would develop a feud with Sapphire and Dusty Rhodes. 1989 was a great year. A lot of memories, a lot of things that went on. I only covered some of it because, again, I only saw it through tapes. I didn't see week to week stuff. I saw it through tapes retrospectively, years later, right? About 4 years later. So that would be like me covering, me being a kid, getting into wrestling right now and covering shit from 2020. But it'd be a lot easier because you have weekly Raws. You didn't have really weekly television. Back then, you had the syndicated shows, which are superstars. But I did the best I could with the major feuds that were going on at the time. Of course, Earthquake debuts, he squashes the Ultimate Warrior, and he'll play a big role the following year in 1990 with Hulk Hogan. He's managed by Jimmy Hart, and he's tag teams with Bravo. But I wanted to do this one just to add a little bit of flavor. I'll be doing 1990, and of course, I'll get back to the ones that I remember, the ones I lived through with the other half of 1998 pretty soon. And I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I'm sorry I wasn't as detailed as I wanted to be because it's 1989. It was before I started watching, and again, I watch it retrospectively. I just wanted to do something really fun. I enjoy doing these year in reviews for wrestling. Wrestling has always been a passion of mine. It's something I love. It's something I'll always kind of love. Even though I go away for a while and I come back and I go away for a while, something always pulls me back in. There's always that one storyline that I'm interested in. Right now, it's the Rhea Ripley and Dominic storyline. This past, earlier this year, it was the Cody Rhodes and The Rock and Roman Reigns and the Bloodline. There's always stuff that pulls me back in for wrestling. But 1989 is a favorite of a lot of people because, especially those fans of NWA and WCW, because They have the Great American Bash that year, which many people consider as the greatest Great American Bash ever. So just when they got rid of Dusty Rhodes as the booker, they have the greatest Great American Bash ever, even with his concept, War Games, because now the Midnight Express are baby faces teaming with the Road Warriors, taking on the Fabulous Freebirds who have come back to wrestling, and they've rekindled the feud with the Road Warriors in WCW. And you have the Wild Samoans managed by Paul Heyman. In a War Games match. And also you have Terry Funk is back. Terry Funk's Hollywood career really didn't go as planned, so he comes back to wrestling. And at first he's a judge in the Ricky Steamboat Ric Flair match. But then when Ric Flair finally wins the because Ricky Steamboat comes back to the NWA and he wrestles Ric Flair, like I said, in the three event their trilogy of matches, their famous trilogy of matches. But one Terry Funk is the judge for. And this one in New Orleans goes head-to-head with WrestleMania V. And it probably would have outsold WrestleMania V like the previous Clash of Champions outsold WrestleMania IV. But George Scott, who the new booker taking over for Dusty Rhodes, he didn't promote it right. He promoted it shitty. So it doesn't do as well, buys-wise as it could have. But Terry Funk is the judge. Terry Funk goes to interview Ric Flair after the match. He challenges Ric Flair for a title shot, and then he beats Ric Flair up and piles drives him through a table. And then they go on the Great American Bash to have an I Quit match, and it's one of the best I Quit matches in the history of wrestling. And Ricky Steamboat goes on to have a classic match on that show with Lex Luger. Paul Heyman wasn't managing the Wild Samoans. He was managing the Samoan SWAT team, but basically it's the same team. It's Fatu and Samu, who are going to become the head shrinkers in the WWE later on. When they were in WCW, they were the Samoan SWAT team. Anyway, that's the Flair and Steamboat classic matches and the real work. The Mega Powers exploding, the long-term storytelling, basically a year of build. The first time they ever did this, we talked about them doing it before. They're basically doing it now. Whenever they do finally blow off with The Rock versus Roman Reigns, it'll be a year build, a 2-year build. It'll probably surpass that. But they've done it with Rock and Cena in 2012. They've done it with Hogan and Sting in 97, and they did it here for the first time ever that I remember, as far as like when they've had pay-per-views and weekly shows. I don't know, in the 60s and 70s, they probably, the Briscoes and the Funks, maybe they did programs like that, building it for a year or whatever. But this was 1989 was the first time that I really could think back that I know of, in the times that I know of in professional wrestling, that they did this long build stuff. And it was little by little stuff. Little by little, Hogan would get closer to Elizabeth and get closer to Elizabeth, and you were kind of ambivalent about it. As kids, of course, we loved Hulk Hogan. We loved the Three Demandments, the training, the prayers, and the vitamins. But as adults, we look back at him and be like, wait a minute, Hogan was a scumbag scheming to try to fuck Miss Elizabeth. He had lust in his eyes, brother. He was the luster, as Jesse Ventura said. Now Jesse Ventura is back in the company. If they put him on commentary, what will he say about Hogan's foray into politics? Let's see. If they put him on, I don't know what Jesse's going to do. He's back in WWE. But anyway, peace, guys. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hope you enjoyed this one. Love you guys.